Hello, my friends. Today I want to read to you the first chapter of The Last Bear by Hannah Gold. Chapter 1, The Letter. April Wood came face to face with the polar bear exactly 3 weeks after she had arrived on Bear Island. But before that, she had to get to Bear Island in the first place, and that journey began approximately 4 months earlier. Up until that point, there had been a normality to April's everyday life, although she was the first to admit it was a rather odd kind of normality. Her father worked as a scientist in a nearby university, where he spent his days researching weather patterns. Like the weather, he came and left the house at the most unpredictable of times. Sometimes he'd get home at 11 p.m., or he would leave just when she got home from school. He worked random weekends, but would have 3 days off in a week. Even then, he would shut himself in his study and bury his face in dusty old books with writing so tiny it made your eyes hurt just to read them. When April brought him a pot of tea or his dinner, he would shake his head, take off his glasses, and look at her curiously, as if he had completely forgotten he had a daughter. "Oh," he would say. "Thank you, April." Then he would put his head back down and chew the top of his pen, and she would gently close the study door behind her. April was only 4 when her mother died, and whenever she thought of her, it was like thinking of a lovely summer vacation she'd been on once. Her father hadn't remarried, and it showed in the house. It was tall and thin and looked ever so slightly unhappy around the edges, and inside it always felt cold. There was a thin layer of dust coating everything and a horrible feeling of something missing, a feeling that April never quite knew how to put into words. And so she spent most of her time in the backyard, where, in the wild, unkempt bramble bush, a family of urban foxes lived. She was fascinated by one in particular, who she called Braveheart, because he seemed bolder than the others, and because he'd almost allowed her to feed him some strawberries from her hand. Time spent in the yard whizzed by and was only interrupted by school. April didn't like school, or the girls at school didn't like her. She didn't know whether it was because she smelled a fox, or the fact that she was the smallest girl in her class, or even the fact that she cut her own hair with a pair of garden shears. Either way, April didn't mind too much, because she preferred animals to humans anyway. They were just kinder. Then the letter arrived. April was eating a bowl of cornflakes cross-legged on the floor, while on the other side of the living room her father dangled a piece of toast dripping with marmalade over today's newspaper. It was the end of November, and April raced to the door when the mail landed with a thud on the mat. Maybe it would be a Christmas card from Granny Apples. She not only liked to send her cards early, but was also her favorite grandmother because she smelled of warm, sugary pastry and lived next to the sea. There were no Christmas cards, but there was a big, fat envelope marked Official Government Business, and it was postmarked Norway. She placed it by her father's toast, and he absent-mindedly picked it up to take a bite. When he realized what it was, a funny look passed over his face, as if someone had cast a magic spell into his eyes. "What is it?" she asked him. "We're going to the Arctic Circle," he said, opening the letter and blinking fast. "I got the job. I didn't think I would, to be honest. I thought they would choose someone local, but apparently my research paper on the scientific study of atmosphere swayed them. It's a weather station on a small island about a day's boat journey away from the coast of Norway." April hopped up and down before answering. "What kind of an island? How many people live there?" He looked down sheepishly. "It's not that kind of an island. In fact, there won't be anybody there but us." "Just us two?" Something fizzy rushed through her. "On an island, all alone?" He leaned forward in his chair. "Think of the adventures we will have. We will be like Scott of the Antarctic. The island is nothing like here. It's got inland lakes, mountains, streams. Imagine it, April. It's the last great unknown. There will be no cars, trains, planes, no roads even. It's pure, untouched wilderness." He didn't need to say anything more because her heart was already racing. Not only would they be in the Arctic Circle, they would also have all this time together, just them. They would be able to do many things like building snowmen, sliding down mountains, and "Of course my work there will be very important," Dad added with his most serious face, and her insides crumbled the tiniest bit. "What will you be doing?" The Norwegian government wants a more accurate representation of how global warming is affecting the Arctic region, so I'll be monitoring the data over a 6-month period. April knew a lot about melting ice caps, and along with fox hunting, it was one of the things that made her feel both angry and useless at the same time. "And my school?" she asked. "April," he said, leaning forward, 6 months in the Arctic will teach you more than 6 years at school ever will. She took a second look at him. His eyes were bright, and there were 2 pink spots of color on his cheeks. The feeling fizzed through her again. "When do we go?" Of course, not everyone was as excited. Granny Apples phoned at least 3 times a day to tell them how irresponsible they were being. What about the freezing cold temperatures? The waves as tall as skyscrapers? The killer walruses with sharp tusks she's seen in those David Attenborough documentaries? Or the dangers of an island where there was no hospital, no doctor, or even anybody else at all who could help them should they get into trouble? It just wasn't right for a girl of 11, she said, especially such a sensitive girl as April, who thanks to her father was feral enough already. How could he possibly think about going away to a deserted island, and not even a warm one at that, was in her best interests? But Dad was stubborn when he wanted to be, and just pretended to be deaf. "For goodness sakes, Edmund," she bellowed at him in frustration, "it's called Bear Island. What if she gets eaten?" Although he tried to reassure her that there were no bears on Bear Island, Granny Apples refused to listen. "If you see a polar bear, April," she said, "remember to run!" So it was that on April 1st, they started the first leg of their journey. They were to fly to Oslo, then change planes and head to a small town called Tromsø, and from there a boat journey to Bear Island. As the plane took off and turned its nose north, April pressed her face to the window and looked down on her disappearing home. This was it. They were headed to the Arctic Circle.